You fool! This isn't even my final form!
Hello, and welcome to my review of It, the novel by Stephen King, and this is going to be chapter 21 entitled Under the City. Overall thoughts from this chapter. Excellent. Again, maybe possibly the best chapter yet. Possibly the best chapter yet. I really liked this chapter. The character interactions were fantastic. 10 out of 10 for character building. You know all the characters at this point. You know what they're doing. And that was really cool. Some of the reveals we got, that's really cool. I like the lore building in this chapter. I like that a lot. I keep saying that. I do like a lot of things a lot, though. So, one thing I need to say, though, and I'll go into more details of this in just a bit, but some of the things that were finally revealed, as much as I liked the sort of larger, like making the canon larger, I didn't think some of the things made sense. So I'll get into that a little bit as it comes along, but right now I'm just going to go through the sections and talk about what I thought about each one and just give updates for everyone. So here we go. First section here, and I do plan to combine some of these sections, but the first section is called It, Summer of 1958. And we get a little bit of an origin story here. It's sort of a backstory. It existed with the turtle. The turtle is the one that sicked up the universe, that's the way that it's written in there, and then fainted. So the turtle, I'm guessing, is some sort of deistic being, and also it existed. It found the planet Earth because the food there was really good, because the animals on planet Earth had really good imagination. It created dairy in its own image as its killing pen, and the people were its sheep, and everything had gone according to plan, and it slept and woke and ate and then slept again, and it kept doing that until everything changed when the fire... I'm just kidding. It did that until these kids showed up, and it says these are different. These kids are different from everyone else. And that experience on Neibolt Street, that was the first time that it experienced pain and fear. It experienced the emotion of fear, and it experienced the emotion of wanting to have revenge, calling them back. And it starts to fear that maybe it's not the only being. Maybe there's another. There is another. And maybe that being is the being that's giving the kids power. Maybe it's working on their behalf. So it starts to be fearful, and it wants revenge. It says it'll be much the same, but their imagination will be stripped down. And it also, well, I already mentioned it had that emotion of revenge, but I was going to say it wants to cast them into the deadlights, and the deadlights are its eyes. So that's interesting. That's just some backstory there. Something else is mentioned. Oh, yes. We get an explanation, and I apologize if it didn't get revealed in this section, but the reason it has itself as a clown is because that's something that's easy for the children to be enticed by. What kid didn't like a clown, is what it said. So, that's interesting. I think there's a little bit more about it revealed later, and I think I actually went into a section that I didn't mean to go into yet, but I'm going to move on from here. Like I said, I am going to be combining some of these sections because there are 15 in this chapter. I'm not going to go through every single one. First section, though, interesting. Kind of an origin story. I've been waiting for that kind of thing, and I think this was the right moment to reveal that, so good job with that. Section 2 here is entitled In the Tunnels. This was probably the beginning of the really awesome stuff in this chapter. You get the kids crawling through the tunnels after they went down there in the previous chapter. They're crawling down into the tunnels, and they're trying to find their way to it. And there's a lot of stuff in here that's... Well, there's a lot of detail that kind of makes you cringe in this section, because they're having to crawl around on this sewage, and they're dropping things in there, and they're very uncomfortable, and they're also being pursued by Henry. And it's really, really easy to see the imagery here. But the character interactions are pretty great. I think Stan and, well, I know Richie, a lot of them got off some good ones. They told some jokes that were pretty funny. So I liked that. I had this one thing I was thinking about, which was, if they're lighting matches down there, isn't there sewer gas or something that could ignite? I'm not entirely sure. That's just a thing I was curious about. I'm going to go ahead and talk about just some things that happened down there, because I'm starting to forget which things happened in which section, because they're sort of going back and forth between them. But I'm going to cover some things that happened in these sections, and then I'm going to go back and get things that I missed. So the kids are crawling through, and eventually 2 things happen. The first thing is they discover the body of Belch Huggins down there. Or excuse me, they discover the body of Patrick Hockstetter down there. And we already knew that Patrick Hockstetter was dead from an earlier chapter, but just them stumbling upon it and the various reactions they have, Eddie saying, "I don't really care because he was one of the ones that hurt me," Beverly being the one who saw it happen, kind of freaking out about it, them all comforting one another, and especially when Patrick's chasing them. And Patrick and Belch and Victor are all chasing them down there, and we know what happens to Victor and Belch. But Henry's still pursuing them and just sort of getting crazier and crazier. And there's a lot of little details, like water rushing over them in the sewers and stuff like that. But just basically 10 out of 10 for these interactions. They were really great. I don't really know what else to say when it comes to just their journey through there. When you get down to it, it's just kids crawling around in a sewer, and it doesn't sound particularly interesting, but Stephen King wrote it in such a way where it was just, wow. 10 out of 10. I guess for the sake of time, I'm going to stop going into every single section, title, and stuff like that, but in the next section, we get a little bit more of the story with Audra and Tom. So we find out that Tom saw it in its natural form and just died of fright. It's okay. Audra went down there, and it says she was hanging in some webs. And at this point, I'm thinking, is this a big spider? Is this like Return of the King? And it says she was dead, but she wasn't dead. So it seems like it says she's partially in the deadlights. I don't really know what this means yet, but it sounds vaguely like maybe it took her soul or something kind of like that. I don't really know. We find out some backstory, too, about Mike. The reason why Mike is afraid of birds is because when he was a baby, a crow pecked at him when he was in his little baby carriage thing, because his mom was outside and she went around the back to get something for just a second, and a crow came and pecked his arms, and that's why he has that fear. So that's weird. This is where we also got to talk about these contradictions, I think. So it turns out that it scares beings to make them more tasty. Okay, that makes sense. But 2 things about that. Number 1, if Tom literally died of fright when it saw it, why wouldn't it use that form all the time? That seems like the most easy form, because if it's that easy to scare something and paralyze it, I mean, the kids have beaten it before. Maybe it's because these kids are so unique that they've never failed before? I don't know. Also, it says something about a talismanic 7, group of 7 with them. So apparently that number is really important. And it says 5 is not as powerful as 7. But yes, the being is apparently really scary in its natural form, and I don't know why it wouldn't use that form all the time. It also says the fears of adults are more complicated, and the fears of children are simpler. But at the same time, it says this thing about how children, earlier in the book, it says children, when they see a monster, it doesn't faze them as much because it kind of fits into their magical thinking, versus an adult, it messes with their entire worldview. So, what? which is it? Maybe it's that the simplistic nature of children's fears were never a problem for it. Maybe that always made it easier for it until these children came along, because it says that they fed on faith, and I'm guessing that means maybe that was symbolic, and it's talking about it feeds on their own fear. Their own fear makes it easy for it to feed, but at the same time, okay, if children have this quality about them that makes it easier for them to deal with this, then wouldn't that mean it's easier for them to beat it? I don't know. One of 2 things is happening here. Either this is not really being consistent, or it is just very stupid and doesn't think ahead. I don't really know what it is yet. I mean, I do know a little bit more that I'll talk about later, but that's just really interesting. We're kind of getting some things that appear to be contradictions, but maybe it's just more foolish than it thought it was. I don't know. But anyway, all that was interesting. We find out also that it had a never-ending past, and that the kids made it retreat into the earth, where it said it was dripping its strange blood, and they had essentially hurt it very badly, and that had never happened before. So it might be an eternal being, but until this time, nothing had ever hurt it like this. I gotta be honest, I find that kind of hard to believe, that these kids are just so unique that none of them ever figured out how to hurt it before. That just seems unlikely. But anyway, we switch back to the future again, and then they're going around in the tunnels as adults. Things are playing out much the same. It's kind of funny. Some of the lines are almost exactly the same as they were when they were kids. I think that's... It's not irritating or anything. It doesn't feel like things are being repetitive. That's something Stephen King did a really good job with in this. Nothing really feels that repetitive. It's just things are happening again, but in a slightly different way. One really powerful moment to me was they go into this little clearing that they came out of. Well, they went into one pipe, and then they come out of one pipe, and there's like this little section where there's like a little cap above them, and there's these 3 pipes and stuff like that. And they see the bones down there of Belch and Victor. And it's like all of them are adults, but the bones are still children. And something about that just really stuck with me. Like, these are their childhood bullies. They were the same size as them or bigger. And yet they were victims of it just the same. And when they stumble upon those bones, they're still children. And it's like they're looking down on them now as adults. That's really impactful to me. So I like the way that was written there. We get this thing with Audra where she has this thought, oh Jesus, it's female. So apparently it's female. And then Bill was getting very paranoid because he was going way too far ahead in that section. And Bill's really struggling with his emotions in this chapter. We also find out that it can indeed read their thoughts. That's a suspicion I had before that was confirmed in this chapter. So yes, it can read their thoughts. It actually can hear them as sort of sentences, so that's interesting. We get in this chapter possibly the best scene. Well, I was going to say we get in this section possibly the best scene in this chapter. That is the confrontation with the eye. This giant eye comes crawling down the sewer, and that did frighten me when that happened. But they're all there, and Eddie is the one who gets up the courage to say, hey, we can beat it. We can beat it on our terms, because he uses his aspirator as this poison weapon because he's pretending that it's poison, and he realizes if they're not afraid, they can attack it and they can fight it, and that makes it go away. And wow, just they were all showing immense courage in this scene and standing up for themselves, and it was really great. You really feel that they're getting this fleshed out dynamic as a team, and all of them are contributing something, except for Mike, who didn't really do much in that scene, but you know, you win some, you lose some. That was really great. Same thing happened next with Stan and the birds, because we find out the reason why Stan naming those birds helped, and it's because naming the birds means that he knows his birds really well, and that bird is not a real one. The one that came to attack Mike Hanlon is not a real one. So, yeah, that was really cool. We got some confirmation on that. I had no idea why that worked before. But when they go and they face this giant bird, that's what happens under the tunnel. Also, these tunnels are sort of expanding again and making them bigger on the inside. Sort of like what happened with the house. So that's cool. They finally find the door of the lair to it. I said crate earlier about what it was in the last chapter. It's not a crate, it's a door. They find this door into the lair of it, and the door is something different for each and every one of them. Something they're afraid of, something that they've experienced it as. This also happens as adults when they go there. They go up to the door and they see something different, and they sort of open the door and they go in. So at this point, I'm just going to combine and cover a bunch of stuff that I thought was interesting. Okay, so they're going into the lair of it as children, but they're not there yet as adults in this chapter because a bunch of other stuff has to happen. Okay, so Mike Hanlon's still in the hospital. That's still important. We'll come back to that in a minute. So basically, none of them remembers what it looks like, except for maybe Mike. But conveniently, Mike is in the hospital, like I said, and that is important. And they know they have to use the They know they have to use the ritual of Chewed, but they don't remember what it is exactly. At this point, a bunch of really crazy stuff starts happening. We find out about this bell tower that only failed to chime one time, and that was when the ironworks thing blew up. And a lot of people thought that the guy there was was not letting it chime out of respect for the people who died there, but it turns out it just didn't chime. It doesn't chime again, and clouds start forming in Derry, and all this stuff is happening, and old people in the town who remember that are starting to feel uneasy. At this time, they're down there in the tunnels, and they see little Georgie down there. It takes the form of Georgie, and it tries to get to Bill's emotions, and it works for a while. It really works. It starts to get to Bill, but the others are there to support him, and finally it goes away. But that stuff with Georgie was pretty intense. It's using Bill's guilt using Bill's feelings that he was responsible for his death somehow. And finally, Bill realizes that, no, it wasn't my fault that you died. He still feels bad about it. He still feels sad that Georgie died, but he realizes it wasn't actually his fault, and he sort of lets go of that guilt with the help of others. At the same time, Derry starts flooding like crazy. All these things are happening with lightning striking places and starting fires and people getting electrocuted, and it's basically doomsday in Derry. It reminds me of a scene I read from a Shakespeare play once. But that's basically what's happening. At the same time, Mike is up there, and this nurse comes in the room and decides that he is going to help put Mike to sleep, and he's sort of in a daze, and Mike realizes that something is wrong. Bill senses this too, and he has them all to get together in a circle, and they sort of pray and send their power up to Mike. They say, whatever this being is, please send your power up to Mike, and it helps Mike, and he is able to escape from this situation. So that's good. And Mike, basically breaks this vase in the doctor's face, and the doctor does not end up killing him with the syringe, which he's going to. And then they end up going together into the layer of it as adults. And that is how we're leading up to this climax here. This is really weird because there's just a lot of strange things happening all at the same time. And yeah, it's super weird. It's sort of the Stephen King supernatural elements clashing type thing. And hey, at least it's an exciting finale. At least there's nothing boring going on. It's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit woohoo. But hey, it's exciting, and I'm wrapped up in the story right now, so that's good. And like I said, all that leads us into them walking to the lair of it. So finally, we're here at the end of this little journey under the sewers. Well, not really the end, but we're here under the sewers, and it is there. And this is interesting. I have a lot of things to say about what it finally is. So I was right. It was a big spider. It's a giant spider, and the only thing about that is Bill realizes that, well, maybe it's in this form because we couldn't comprehend it if it was in its natural form. And we find out that its natural form is orange light. It's a furry creature that crawls, and it's made of orange light. And the light mocks life. In other words, deadlights. And if you remember, earlier they saw this sort of weird thing where these orange lights sort of flicked towards the sewer, so that's what it was. Okay, and they find out it's female. Not only is it female, it has an egg sac. It's going to lay some baby spider light orange thingies. And that's why they had to come back, because they had to stop that from happening. They had to make sure that didn't happen, but it called them back, and it started questioning whether it made a mistake. This yellow-green light was emanating from this place, and it was sort of it was described as a portal. So maybe, who knows where they're going, but they go in there, and Audra's hanging up, and it's a giant spider crawling around on this web. And that's interesting. I like that idea. I mean, I know it's kind of goofy, but I didn't really get to that part like, oh man, because I didn't know what it was going to be. It could have been anything. I've read some Stephen King books where I got to the end and I was like, really? That was not one of those things. So, hey, I like that. It turned into a Batman story under the city. It's really weird, and it's got like this alien from the multiverse. We do hear that the macroverse is what it's called in this story, but it's the multiverse. So it's a giant furry light spider that's orange that came from the macroverse and started making scary things happen in Derry, Maine. So, okay, I'll take it. I'm curious to see what happens next. This is interesting, though, because it says only kids could handle that. They had to become like children to handle this, and I'm thinking, clearly it didn't. I hope it didn't know this, because why would it select kids if only kids can beat it? Seems kind of counterproductive, and it says it's eaten adults before, so it seems kind of weird that you would pick the only beings to eat and to kill and eat that could hurt you. So, but maybe it's a situation where the kids' greatest weakness is also their greatest strength, which it kind of says too. So, okay. I think I answered my own question. That's what it is. Hey, I'll take it. All right, this was a really long chapter, but overall, it's kind of like I'm watching a show and I've only got like 3 episodes left. It's like, what'd you think? You're like, I think I want to finish it. You know, that's kind of, I want to know what happens, and then I'll talk about my whole thing. It is possible that I could get to the end of this book and something really stupid could happen, and I will hate it. I'm just saying, I don't want to talk about any specific books, but there have been Stephen King books that I read, and I got to the end, and then something stupid happened, and I was like, really? That was the way you're going to do that? Ugh. And a lot of times when I get to these endings, it's like, the thing that gets to me is I can think of other things that I would have preferred to happen, like, oh, if only they would have done this, right? If only this would have happened. That this could have been so much better. Actually, I've had that happen with a lot of things recently. Maybe I should just be a writer. I've got some things in the works. I've actually am writing a novel right now. Getting off track here. Yes, that's something that happens sometimes. And I'm hoping that's not going to happen this time. I really like these characters. I really like this setting, and there's some stuff coming up that I know that I'm not going to like very much, but I just hope that this is like not something that happens where I get to the end and it's like, oh, why did you do that? I'm kind of nervous. A lot of people get nervous when things are bad. I get nervous when things are really good. I get nervous when I like things, and then I get to the end and I'm like, oh gosh, please don't screw this up with something stupid. So we shall see. We shall see. Okay, that's my review of this chapter. Really great. I like, and I know I've said this in another video before, and if you've seen that video, I guess I wouldn't bother not spoiling it, but I won't, just in case you haven't seen it. But in that video, I talked about how I don't mind when different genres are combined for the same story. I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating when stories can transcend all these different genres and become different things, because real life is like that, right? In your life, you experience horror and romance and excitement and fun and depression and all these other things that make your life what they are. So I like to see when stories reflect all these things. There are parts in it that are very funny, and there are parts that are romantic, and there are parts that are just frightening, and there are parts that are just gross, and it's great when those things are combined together. And now we're into this science stuff, and science is part of your life, hopefully, and it's interesting. I'm just hoping it's not going to get super goofy at the end. Yeah, okay, those are my thoughts of this chapter. If you like this content, be sure to like this content, because I will be making more of it. And if you want to see more content, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit all notifications so that hopefully you will be notified every time I make a new video. Okay, I'm talking super fast, but that is all for now. I'm going to keep reading this book. In the meantime, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and talk to you all later. Bye-bye.